My son looked me dead in the eye, in front of his new in-laws, and told me to apologize or leave his house forever. I chose to leave. What he didn't know was that the moment I walked out that door, I was holding a secret that would burn his entire marriage to the ground within 6 months. And I didn't even have to lift a finger. I just had to stop protecting him. If you've ever been humiliated by someone you sacrificed everything for, stay until the end, because what happened to my son still gives me chills, and I promise you it is worth every second of your time. Before we go further, hit that like button and subscribe, because stories like this one deserve to be heard, and I have many more waiting for you. My name is Diane. I'm 61 years old, and for 30 years I raised my son Caleb alone. His father left when Caleb was 4, and I never once made him feel the absence of a man in the house, because I filled that space with double shifts at the hospital where I worked as a nurse, with homework help until midnight, with a mortgage I paid by myself for 2 decades. Caleb was my entire world, and I never resented a single sacrifice, because I believed, foolishly perhaps, that love given freely would be returned in kind. Caleb grew into a good man, or so I thought. He went to college on scholarships and loans I co-signed. He built a career in software sales. And 2 years ago he met Priya. I liked her at first. She was polished, sharp-tongued in a way that could be funny, and clearly ambitious. Her parents, Sunil and Meera, owned a chain of dental clinics across 3 states. And it was obvious from the first dinner that they measured people by their bank accounts and their zip codes. I didn't come from money. My house was paid off, small, cluttered with 30 years of memories, not granite countertops. And from the very first family dinner, I felt the cold assessment in Meera's eyes, the way she'd glance at my department store blazer and then at her daughter's diamond earrings, doing some silent arithmetic that always left me on the losing side. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself Caleb saw through all of that because I raised him better. I was wrong. The wedding was beautiful, and I paid for the rehearsal dinner out of my retirement savings without telling anyone, because Caleb mentioned once, almost in passing, that Priya's parents were making comments about how the Delgado side of the family wasn't contributing enough. I never told Caleb what that dinner cost me. I never told him about the extra shifts I picked up for 4 months to cover it. I just wanted him to walk into his marriage without that particular humiliation hanging over him. That should have told me something about the pattern I was already accepting. The trouble really started 8 months into the marriage, when Priya's parents invited us all to their lake house for a long weekend to celebrate Sunil's 60th birthday. I remember the drive up, how Caleb kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror, already anxious, already coaching me. "Mom, please don't bring up the cost of things. Don't mention your work schedule, they think nursing is beneath them. Just please blend in." Blend in. As if I were an embarrassment to be managed rather than the woman who gave up her entire 20s and 30s, so he could have a childhood free of want. I said nothing during that drive. I told myself I could survive 1 weekend. The first night went fine enough, stiff conversation over an expensive dinner I didn't touch much of because nerves had killed my appetite. But the second night is the one that changed everything. We were sitting on the back patio after dinner, 12 of us total, extended family and a few of Sunil's business partners who'd been invited to the birthday celebration. Meera had a few glasses of wine in her, and she turned to me with that particular smile people wear right before they say something cruel and call it honesty. "Diane," she said, loud enough for the whole patio to hear, "I have to ask, how does it feel knowing you'll never really be able to keep up with us? I mean, we love Caleb, we really do, but Priya is used to a certain lifestyle and I do worry sometimes what influence comes from, well, your side." The patio went quiet. I felt my face go hot. I opened my mouth to respond calmly, the way 30 years of keeping the peace had trained me to. But before I could say a word, Caleb spoke. "Mom, come on. Don't make this weird. She didn't mean it like that. She absolutely meant it like that." Every person on that patio knew exactly what she meant. But my son, my only child, the boy I raised by myself with no help from anyone, chose that moment to protect his mother-in-law's feelings over mine. I stayed quiet the rest of the night. I told myself I'd let it go, because making a scene would only give Meera more ammunition, more stories to tell about the tacky, bitter mother-in-law from the wrong side of the tracks. But something shifted in me that night. A door closed that I didn't know how to reopen. The real breaking point came 3 weeks later, at a dinner Caleb and Priya hosted at their own house, with Sunil and Meera present, along with Priya's sister and her husband. It was meant to be a celebration. Caleb had gotten a promotion, and I was invited, I assumed, as his mother, someone who should be there to see her son succeed. I brought a gift, a nice watch I'd saved for over 2 months, because even after everything I wanted to celebrate him. I wanted to believe the boy I raised was still in there somewhere, buried under the anxiety of trying to please people who would never truly accept him unless he stopped being who he was. Dinner started fine. Then Mira brought up the lake house weekend, laughing about how tense things got, and turned to me and said with that same practiced smile, "Diane, you really should learn to take a joke. We were only teasing." I felt something crack in my chest, 30 years of swallowed comments finally reaching their limit. I said calmly, "I don't think what you said was a joke, Mira. I think you meant every word, and I think you've been finding ways to say it since the day we met." The table went silent. Priya's face went pale. And Caleb, my son, stood up from his chair. His face red with something that looked like fury but was really just fear. Fear of losing, standing in front of the people whose approval he'd been chasing since the wedding. "Mom," he said, his voice sharp enough to cut, "apologize to her right now, or you can leave." I looked at my son. I looked at the boy whose fevers I sat up with all night, whose little league games I never missed even after 16-hour shifts, whose college tuition I paid off 2 years early by skipping vacations, skipping new clothes, skipping everything for myself so he could have everything for himself. And I saw in that moment a stranger. A man who had decided his mother's dignity was a fair trade for his in-laws' comfort. I stood up slowly. I didn't yell. I didn't cry, though everything in me wanted to. I said, "I raised you better than this, Caleb. I hope one day you remember that." And I picked up my purse and I walked out of that house. I sat in my car in their driveway for almost 20 minutes before I could make my hands stop shaking enough to drive. Here is what my son did not know, what none of them knew, as I drove home that night with tears finally falling. 6 months earlier, before any of this happened, Priya had come to me. Alone. Without Caleb. She'd shown up at my house on a Tuesday afternoon, visibly upset, and told me something she swore me to secrecy about. Something that had nothing to do with me and everything to do with the foundation of her family's business. Sunil's dental clinic chain, the one that funded the lake house, the designer clothes, the constant condescension toward anyone without money, was under investigation. Not officially yet, but Priya had found documents, insurance billing records that didn't match patient files, evidence that her father had been running a fraudulent billing scheme for years, charging insurance companies for procedures that were never performed. She was terrified, she told me, because she'd overheard her parents discussing what to do if regulators started asking questions, and one of the ideas floated was to shift blame onto a junior associate, someone who had no idea what was happening, someone who would take the fall to protect the family name. She'd come to me because she was scared and didn't know who else to trust, someone outside the family who wouldn't immediately report it or use it against her parents in some family power struggle. I told her gently that she needed to be honest with authorities before this became worse for everyone, including the innocent associate who might get scapegoated. She'd cried and said she needed time to think, and begged me not to tell Caleb, because he idolized her father and she was afraid of what it would do to their marriage if he found out she'd been sitting on this for months already. I kept that secret for 6 months. I kept it through the lake house weekend, through Mira's insults, through every single slight, because I loved Priya despite her mother, and because I believed people deserved the chance to fix their own mistakes before the world found out about them. But the night Caleb told me to apologize or leave, something in me finally let go of the obligation to protect people who had shown me nothing but contempt. I didn't call the authorities. I didn't need to. I simply called Priya 3 days later, calmly, and told her that I could no longer carry the weight of her secret while being treated like garbage by the very family that secret protected. I told her I thought it was time she told the truth, to Caleb first, and then to whoever needed to know, because carrying it alone was clearly destroying her, and because an innocent associate's career and reputation were hanging in the balance of her silence. She broke down on the phone. She said she'd tried to tell her father to fix it quietly, and he'd refused, doubling down instead, moving forward with plans to push the blame onto the junior associate, a young woman named Priya genuinely liked and respected. That was the piece that finally moved her. Not the fear of her father's crimes being exposed, but the fear of an innocent woman's life being destroyed to protect a guilty man. 2 weeks later, the investigation became formal. Federal insurance fraud investigators opened a case into Sunil's clinics after an anonymous tip, Priya's, though she never confirmed it publicly. Within a month it was in local news. 3 of his clinics were raided, records seized, and it turned out the fraud went back almost 8 years, involving over $2 million in false claims. Sunil was charged. Mira's world, the one built entirely on money and appearances, collapsed in slow, humiliating motion, covered by local news outlets that Mira herself had once bragged about knowing personally. The lake house was sold to cover legal fees. The designer clothes stopped mattering when your family name is attached to a fraud indictment. Caleb, for his part, was devastated, not by his mother-in-law's cruelty finally catching up with her, but by the discovery that his wife had known for 6 months and said nothing, and that his own mother had known too, and had chosen in the end to let the truth surface rather than keep protecting people who'd made her feel small at every opportunity. He showed up at my door about 2 months after everything became public. He looked thinner, older somehow, the confidence that had let him tell his own mother to apologize or leave completely drained from his face. "Did you know?" he asked, standing on my porch like a stranger. "Did you know about Sunil before everyone else did?" I didn't lie to him. I told him everything, that Priya had confided in me, that I'd kept the secret out of respect for her, and that I'd finally told her enough was enough on my end after the night he chose his in-laws' comfort over his own mother's dignity. I expected anger. I expected him to accuse me of ruining his marriage, of being vindictive, of using a secret as a weapon. Instead, he sat down on my porch steps and put his face in his hands and cried, the way he used to cry as a little boy when he finally understood he'd done something wrong that couldn't be easily fixed. "I told you to apologize or leave," he said. "In front of everyone. To you. After everything you did for me." "Yes," I said. "You did." I was so scared of losing their approval that I lost sight of who actually built me into a person worth approving of. I didn't say anything right away. 30 years of sacrifice doesn't heal in one conversation on a porch step. But I sat down next to him because he was still my son, and I still loved him even after everything. It's been 8 months since that day. Caleb and Priya are still married, working through a lot of damage that took years to build and won't be undone quickly. Priya, to her credit, testified against her father when it mattered, and has spent the time since trying to build a version of integrity that wasn't handed to her growing up. Sunil is currently serving time, and Mira, the woman who once measured my worth by my blazer, now works retail to make ends meet, something she never imagined for herself, and something I take no pleasure in if I'm honest, because bitterness, real bitterness, was never who I wanted to become. Caleb calls me every Sunday now. Not out of guilt, though I think some of that lingers, but because he told me he finally understood what respect actually looks like, and he didn't want to lose the chance to show it to me for whatever years I have left. I think about that night on the patio sometimes, Mira's smile, the silence that followed her cruelty, and my son's voice telling me to apologize or leave. I think about how easy it would have been to stay quiet forever, to keep swallowing insults for the sake of peace that was never really peace at all, just quiet humiliation dressed up as tolerance. I didn't destroy anyone. I simply stopped protecting people who never once protected me. And in the end, the truth did what it always does eventually. It found its way to the surface, with or without my help. I just decided I was done being the only person expected to sacrifice for everyone else's comfort. If you've ever had to walk away from people who made you feel small, only to watch the truth eventually catch up with them, I want to hear your story in the comments below. And if this video meant something to you, please subscribe, because there are so many more stories like mine still to come. Stories about the quiet strength it takes to finally say enough, and about the peace that waits for you on the other side of that decision. I'm Diane, and I'm no longer the woman who apologizes just to keep the peace. I'm the woman who finally chose herself, 30 years too late perhaps, but not one day too late for what's left of my life. And that, more than any apology I never gave, is the real ending to this story.